1 year ago, Mother's Day, as a church, we worshiped in our parking lot. Remember that. Just a year ago, we were still in that quarantine time where so much was uncertain. We didn't know what was next. We didn't know what was going on. And we were in the parking lot. And it's a good thing that we're not today. It's raining, thundering, at least here in St. Louis. Some of you online might be in other places. But it would be better for us today to be here. And we thank God for that. We thank God that we're able to gather. We've been talking about how there are things in life that are so profound that we measure time by them. There's a before and there's an after, and things can never be the same like before. Something happens and it's just so profound that we live in kind of an after. And I think our generation, this generation, will mark time before COVID and after COVID. Already I hear people saying that, well, in quarantine or before this or after this. And I thank God we're starting to look in our society at an after. Little by little, what does after look like? And we thank God for that, for step by step emerging forward. And that's a good thing. But we can't forget that when super profound things happen, you can't go back to before. We cannot rewind to 2019. And whether we like it or not, some things have happened, some pretty profound things have happened, and we can't go back. Things have changed. Things are just different, and it's just the way it is. And this is really all of life, things that happen in our lives, and there's just an after, and you can't go back. Things are just different. That happened for Peter, even as we heard today at the end of John's gospel. He was about to journey into an after. Everything was different. After the grief and the denial and the pain, it was after the crucifixion, the gory death of his master. It was after he ran breathless to a grave and found it empty. No body was there. After the resurrection of Jesus, it changed everything. Everything was different. Nothing could ever be the same. He could never go back to before. And at that moment, in the after, there's one question that matters. One question that's so critical. Do you love me? At the end of John, there's a conversation between Peter and Jesus. Jesus was risen from the dead. He shows himself to his disciples again. He did it again, a miraculous catch of fish, 153 to be exact. And then the disciples realize it's him. They come on shore. There's a fire. He cooks breakfast for them. He says, come have breakfast. And then there's a moment that we come to today, this conversation. We're not quite sure where it happened. Was it still around the fire on the beach, on the Sea of Galilee? Was it Peter and Jesus walking along the beach? We don't know. But it's likely that John was somewhere nearby to overhear. He wrote it down for us. That's why we have it. And Jesus asked Peter, he said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter says, Jesus, you know I love you. Jesus says, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter said, Jesus, you know I love you. Jesus says, tend my sheep. A third time, Jesus says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter is upset at this point. He's wondering, does Jesus doubt me? Is there something wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Why is he asking me? Again, repeating the question. So Peter responds, Jesus, you know everything. You know I love you. You know it. You know everything. Jesus says, feed my sheep. And then he goes on and he says, Peter, there was a day when you dressed yourself and you walked yourself and went where you wanted to go, but there is a day when you will stretch out your hand and you will be led where you do not want to go. And it's a confusing, almost riddle that Jesus speaks, and you wonder, what does that mean? John interprets it for us in the very next verse. John says, this would indicate what kind of death Peter would die. To stretch out your hand, that's a kind of a code word for crucifixion. And we know, not in the New Testament we don't get this, but we come to understand that Peter died by crucifixion. In fact, so much that he didn't find himself worthy to die like his master, so he has to be crucified upside down. And so in this little episode, this conversation, we see the extent to which this question goes. Do you love me? After all is said and done, at the end of all days, after everything, this one question is all that matters. It's the most critical question. It comes at the end of John's gospel. It comes at the end of our life. It gives us motivation for waking up in the morning. It gives us hope for the future. One question: do you love me? Jesus asks. Are you in love with Jesus? Do you believe him? Do you know him? Do you trust him? Do you love him? At the end of all days, that's the singular question. And if your answer is yes, then you need to know that to love Jesus means to love others. That maybe seems really simple, but there's a lot of depth to it. Every time Peter says, Jesus, you know I love you, Jesus responds with a verb, with action. Tend, feed, follow. Which means that love requires action. You cannot love someone without action, without response. You can't just write a Mother's Day card and say, love you, Mom, and not do anything about it. It requires action. Twice in John's gospel, he gives what he calls the new commandment. He says, love one another as I have loved you. It's the new commandment. And he repeats it on more than one occasion. So it's important to love as he has loved you. And in fact, Jesus says, this is how you will be known. This is what defines Christians in the world. This is what distinguishes all of you from other people, is that you love as Jesus has loved you. An extreme love, a radical love, because you know how Jesus has loved you. It's what defines you. The problem is, in our world, especially right now, we're really good at defining ourselves by what we're against. We fit into tribes and labels that define themselves by, we are not that. And I'm afraid sometimes as Christians, we get pulled into that paradigm as well. We are not that. We're against that. We're against conservatives, or we're against liberals. We're against Black Lives Matter. We're against the police. We're against vaccines. We're against cancel culture. Whatever it may be, we're against. Jesus Christ is defined by what he is for. The cross is evidence of that. He is for the world. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son. And he is for the world in all of its mess. Not the good world, the perfect world, the people that deserve it world. He is for sheep that are frustrating and annoying. He is for sheep that are his enemies. He is for sheep that bite. That is love. And then he turns to you and he says, love as I have loved you. It's a simple command, but it's hard. Because it's hard for you and for me to love people, sheep that are annoying, frustrating, that we have difficulty getting along with, that we don't understand. And if you have people in your life today that are difficult to love, maybe even people close to you, maybe family members, listen closely to Jesus' words. He said, tend or feed my sheep. Remember that they are his. And there are some people that we love them only because they are his. That is the only reason. not of our own will or strength, but because they belong to Jesus. For him, we will do it. To love Jesus means to love others. Do you love me? Jesus asks. And if the answer is yes, you need to know that to love Jesus means to sacrifice. He said to Peter, you will stretch out your hands. That's crucifixion. He said to Peter, you will be led where you do not want to go. You will do things that you would not choose to do of your own accord. Love requires, and love of Jesus requires sacrifice. In fact, you don't really love until you give something up. It requires that you give something up. And when you go where you do not want to go, where God has called you, or you do something that he has called you to do that you would rather not do, that's a sacrifice. And that's what he calls when he says, do you love me? Now, it would be easier not to answer Jesus' question, not to follow him. It would be easier to live a cushy cotton candy life. That would be easy. But it would be boring. Life in Christ is an adventure. And it requires sacrifice. Mother Teresa, as you may know, cared for the poorest, the orphans, the neediest in Calcutta, India, for much of her life, for years. She was right in the middle of filth and the mess and the poverty. And once there was someone who went to interview her to report on her ministry. They followed her around. And at one point they asked her, Mother Teresa, why do you do this? What's your motivation? And she said, I wouldn't do this for $1 million. But for Jesus, I would. For Jesus, we will. When it's hard to sacrifice, hard to obey, for no other reason, for Jesus, we will. When it comes down, after everything, at the end of all days, it's one question, a critical question, and it's ringing in your ears today. Jesus says, do you love me? It's a simple question. But think about it before you answer. Because there are times when we're littered with doubt and fear. There are times when we fail in that response and how we do it. We have to admit that. It's hard to sacrifice. It's hard to obey. And when it's hard, and when you wonder, have I let Jesus down? I said yes, but I failed. When you wonder that, remember not just what was asked. Remember who asked it. The one who asks you, do you love me? You know him. You know what he's done for you. You know how he's loved you. So when he asks the question, it's different than anybody else who asks you, do you love me? Notice that Jesus didn't ask, how much have you accomplished? How successful are you? How much do you have? How many people like you? How strong are you? Jesus didn't ask any of those questions. He simply asked, do you love me? Because he loves you, not for anything that you do or any accomplishment that you have. He has created you in love and redeemed you in love, paid a price to win you back, to show his love, so that you can see his heart by what he has done. And now you know, you can't find this in anyone else. You know that his love, it has no ceiling, no cap. It has no limits, no leash. No one's going to love you more than he does. No one has ever done what he has done for you. And notice the question, how he addresses Peter, how personal it is. He says, Simon, son of John, Do you love me? Simon, son of John. He calls him by his name, his given name, not his nickname. His nickname was Peter, Rock, the Rock. Here he calls him by his given name, Simon, son of John, 3 times. As if to say, Simon, son of John, I know you. I know where you come from. I see you. I've known you before you were born. Simon, son of John, I love you. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Jeff, son of Paul and Nancy of the Minnesota Clater tribe, do you love me? Chris, do you love me? Bob, do you love me? Sarah, do you love me? Dave, do you love me? Steve, do you love me? Deb, do you love me? Al, do you love me? It's personal. It's personal. So he talks to Peter, and it's personal when it comes to you. Do you love me? After everything, it's the one question that matters. Because there are things that happen in life that are so profound that we measure time by them. There's a before and there's an after, and you can never go back to before. You're living in the after. And in the after, there's one question that matters. One question. We're in the after right now. Christ has risen from the dead. Christ is risen. God wins. Life is eternal. Jesus is on the move right now. His kingdom comes. His will is done. And as you live life in the after, let his question ring in your ears this week. Meditate on it. Hear it. And hear the voice of the one who calls it, the one who calls you in love. This one question. Do you love me? Amen.